And here we are, the Toronto Maple Leafs versus the Tampa Bay Lightning 2023 playoff series rematch. So, as a Leafs fan, I'm nervously optimistic that they can get it done this year. You know, other years, you could see this series being a high-scoring affair, but with the additions or the changes that have been made on the defensive end of the game for the Maple Leafs and the additions that they've made at the trade deadline to bolster the defensive core, as well as the changes deep in the middle with the additions of Ryan O'Reilly and Noel Acciari, I predict this series will be a tight-checking, low-scoring affair. So let's get in and look at some details. So last year's playoff results. Game 1, the Leafs won 5-0. Game 2, Tampa won 5-3. So they split at Toronto. Game 3 in Tampa was a 5-2 Leafs victory. Game 4, 7-3 Tampa. Game 5, back to Toronto for a 4-3 Leafs victory. Game 6, 4-3 for Tampa. And, of course, the notorious Game 7, 2-1 for Tampa. The goals scored in that series, they scored 47 goals overall in that series last year. 24 goals for Toronto and 23 goals for Tampa. The power play opportunities. The Maple Leafs had 28 power plays, and they were successful 14.3% of the time. Whereas the Lightning had 33 power plays, and they were successful or took advantage 21.2%. So there was a difference there of 5 power play opportunities for Tampa. The penalty kill. The Leafs killed the penalty 78.8% of the time, while the Lightning 85.7% of the time. So that right there says a lot about Tampa's defense last year in being able to take advantage of the penalty kill. They did have successful power play opportunities, 21.2% of the time, like I'd said just a minute ago, but they had 5 more opportunities over the Leafs. And the reason I mention those two statistics is because even though the scales were kind of tipped a little bit in opportunities, the Leafs were still hanging in there and still had an opportunity to close out the Lightning. And they were the only team last year that actually took the Lightning to 7 games. The save percentages last year. So Jack Campbell last year during the regular season had a .916 save percentage. But as soon as the playoffs kicked off, his save percentage went down to .897%. The Lightning, Vasilevsky had .922% save percentage in last year's playoffs. During the regular season last year, he had a .916 around, 91516, something like that. But there, the difference, even with the Leafs in Campbell having a .897 save percentage, the Leafs were still able to hang on to most of those games and really challenge Tampa to 7 games. This year, Samsonov's regular season is .917. And Vasilevsky's season this year is similar to last year at .916. So we can expect Vasilevsky, his save percentage, to go up a little bit in the playoffs. Last year, it was .922. So the Maple Leafs roster changes. So after the dreaded Game 7 last year against Tampa, the Leafs have added quite a few additions to their roster, including Ryan O'Reilly, Calle Jarnkrok, Zach Aston-Reese, Noel Acciari, Luke Schenn, Jake McCabe, Eric Gustafsson, Connor Timmins, Matt Murray, and Ilya Samsonov. They lost Ilya Mikheyev, Pierre Engvall, Jason Spezza, Colin Blackwell, Andre Kasha, Jake Muzzin due to injury, and Ilya Lyubushkin, and of course, Jack Campbell. Whereas last year, the Tampa Bay Lightning defense, their changes that they made since last playoffs, they lost Ryan McDonough and Callie Foote, but they added Ian Cole, Nick Perbeeks, and Darren Radish. So there's a few difference makers. The Leafs were good enough to beat Tampa last year and came up just short, like I've been saying this whole time. Even with goaltending subpar last year's playoffs, they still came close to closing out Tampa. But since then, the Leafs have added toughness. They have added the Ryan O'Reilly factor. And Ryan O'Reilly was the 2019 Conn Smythe winner. And that's the MVP during the playoffs when they won the cup. He's had a 30-point season overall this year. But with Toronto alone, he's played 13 games. And in those 13 games, he's had 4 goals, 7 assists for a total of 11 points. Ryan O'Reilly makes an immediate impact on the Tavares line with a face-off percentage win of 62%. So every time he's playing with Tavares on that line, immediately makes an impact there with 62% face-off wins. When they added Luke Schenn, also known as the human eraser, he has the ability to stand guys up at the line. He clears the front of the net perfectly. He boxes guys out, pushes them out physically, and he hits hard. He's not afraid to finish his checks in the corner. So, the Tampa Bay wingers are going to have a really hard time in the Leaf zone because they're going to have to watch out for Schenn finishing his checks in the corner, and he's going to finish them hard. Noel Acciari is another factor. He's had 76 hits in 23 games with the Leafs alone. That is an enormous amount of hits in 23 games. And that's also a huge game changer in favor of the Leafs because they didn't have that asset last year in last year's playoffs. So I'm expecting Noel Acciari to play a big role this year during this series. And incidentally, he doesn't just hit. He makes you feel it with punishing hits. And we've had other players in the past being interviewed earlier this year that were playing against Noel Acciari. And that's one of the things that they kept bringing up. And one of the attributes that Acciari holds is the fact that he hits harder than it looks. And it's just so punishing. Acciari's hits also put Tampa players on notice anytime that Acciari's on the ice. And then we have another factor, the Michael Bunting factor. Now, this could go one way or the other, but I'm hoping that Michael Bunting can get his composure, and I know he can do it. The last couple of games, he's really, curbed that and just played between the whistles and stopped, chirping the refs. If he just plays his game without doing those extra theatrics, I think he's going to be a major factor in this series. Now, like I also said, and why I want to mention it as well, is it could go the other way too. So does he spend time on the top line? I'm not sure. I don't think he's going to be effective on the top line. He's going to be a detriment just by the way the referees are calling penalties against or not against Michael Bunting. So I think maybe if he starts on the third or fourth line and just works in from there, but it could go one way or the other. And if he doesn't keep his composure, they're going to have to end up sitting him and maybe, change him out for a different player, like maybe Matthew Nyes. Matthew Nyes, during these last couple of games, he plays hard in front of the net, and he looks good with O'Reilly and Acciari. He'll make it hard on Vasilevsky for sure, and he can score goals. So that's another key piece that could enter as a factor into this series. Do they start Matthew Nyes game one? I'm not so sure. I think that Matthew Nyes would be better just to sit out game one and see how intense the NHL playoffs can get. And it just affords him that extra opportunity just to see how things are going, especially what Tampa's doing while they're playing that first game. It's a lot better to get a bird's eye view and being able to see everything going on as opposed to being in the game because, you're not being able to see the whole bigger picture. You're not seeing everything that's going on. But I think he'll benefit if he's able to sit and watch the first game at least, just to see what transpires. So also another factor is Samsonov. He only has to be better than an 897 save percentage, because that's what Jack Campbell had last year. And again, like I've been saying, Toronto has taken Tampa to 7 games last year and almost completed the task. So Samsonov just has to be better than a .897 save percentage, which is very, very doable, especially for Samsonov. Key factors that work against the Leafs. Tampa is a team with a winning culture. They know how to win. But Tampa's Tanner Jeannot, right now he's currently out with a knee injury. And it doesn't look like he's going to get back for the first few games, maybe even this entire series. We're not sure. Obviously, Tampa's not showing us their cards, but I don't think he'll be ready for game 1. Incidentally, that was Tampa's only move to bring players in due to the salary cap, and they paid a lot for Tanner Jeannot to bring that factor to kind of counterbalance the Leafs additions. But I don't think Tampa did enough, but that's all they could do based on the salary cap. And then you have the Corey Perry factor, where he gets players off their game. So is it going to be the Corey Perry versus Michael Bunting factor, where they're just going to go head to head? The last game that they played of the year, that's what happened. And Michael Bunting and Corey Perry were, fighting. And I think that is something to watch. But Corey Perry has been doing this for a heck of a lot longer than Michael Bunting. So it'll be interesting to see how this transpires and how this all works out. Maybe Keefe will want to keep Bunting away from Corey Perry. And then you have Vasilevsky. He gets significantly better when the playoffs start. You have the regular season Vasilevsky, but then you have playoff Vasilevsky. And Tampa has played a lot of hockey in the last 3 years. That's one thing that goes against them, but they do know how to flip a switch and just turn it on and get going. And, especially with this series here and how close it was last year and coming in with the additions that the Leafs have made, I think Tampa is going to just flip the switch and be even tougher to play against. Throughout all this, my final prediction, and after all that's said and done, the Leafs took Tampa to 7 games last year, even when Campbell had a terrible .897 save percentage in those games, like I said before. 2 more saves, and the Leafs would have moved on. I think the Leafs can get it done this year with the added leadership of O'Reilly and a few other additions that they made throughout the year. The Leafs added to their team overall. They added 7 new players at the trade deadline alone, while Tampa ended up taking away from their team, losing McDonough and Foote, hoping that they could have, Tanner Jeannot available. But with him getting hurt, it's another strike against. Again, I think that the Leafs will be able to take Tampa. How many games do I think it'll go? I predict the Leafs will win against Tampa in 6. It'll go 6 games, and I think the Leafs will be able to close it out. Another thing I wanted to mention is the additions to the Leafs with Ryan O'Reilly, Noel Acciari, Jake McCabe, Luke Schenn, Lafferty. With those guys there, I think that everyone is going to be extremely surprised. They're going to be surprised at the aggression of the Toronto Maple Leafs as well as their speed. I don't think fans realize that the changes that have been made have made the Leafs a heavier team. We haven't seen remotely what they're going to be like in the playoffs. That's what I believe. You saw, a little bit of it during certain games, the last, half this or the last quarter of the season, but there was just glimpses of it. But I think after some more practices and getting in there and getting, ready for the playoffs, I think there's going to be a lot more intensity. And I think everyone is going to be shocked at what the Leafs are going to produce and what they're going to bring to this Tampa series. I'm really looking forward to it because I know what they can do. I know what they're capable of doing. Now it's just a matter of putting it together. And I think with Ryan O'Reilly there, coaching everybody and pushing them through mentally, I think they're going to be able to get in the right headspace in order to close out this series. And it is going to be something great to watch. So that's what I'm thinking overall, that I just wanted to also interject and mention about this series. What's your prediction? Let me know below in the comments about anything that I've said so far. And I'm really looking forward to the playoffs beginning. The Leafs and Tampa series begin on Tuesday, so in a couple of days from now. So we'll have to see exactly what transpires. And game one is going to be a lot of fireworks, I believe. And because game one is always, message setting, especially after the last game that the Leafs and Tampa had last week, where, the Leafs just dominated and ended up winning that game. And then you had Cooper afterwards saying that, Tampa wasn't even trying. It wasn't even a playoff game. It wasn't even a regular season game, he said. So it'll be interesting to see what game one will bring. I suspect and I believe that the whistles will be put away and there won't be a lot of penalties being called in the first game, and I think that'll work in Tampa's favor. But that being said, with the Leafs making these additions with Ryan O'Reilly and Noel Acciari especially, I think, there's going to be a lot of pushback with these players, and Luke Shen. I think there's going to be a lot of pushback that Tampa isn't expecting. And of course, Jake McCabe as well in there. And Gustafsson, if you want to just, get it all out there. So it'll be an interesting series to see how it goes.